Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 4 of The Lightning. I hope you enjoy it. Karash flew south surrounded by an ice-blue aura. He flew. The Queen's power surged through him along with the knowledge of how to use it. With such power at their command, nothing could stop them from slaying the human king. The team skimmed the ground lest they draw unwanted attention. He doubted a drake would attack. But with the stupid beasts you never knew for certain. There was no danger of such an attack doing any harm, but it might slow them and any delay was unacceptable. To be safe, he had Catan flying alone above them to keep watch for any dangers. Behind him he pulled a bubble holding Akor and his team. Sakar and Kolto each carried one of their other teams in matching spheres. Everyone had clipped their masks to their belts for the long journey. Only once the enemy was in sight would they don them again. The Queen's palace sat at the top of the world, so even flying it would take 2 days to reach the border with the human kingdom. They would leave Wanray's team just on this side of it, so they could sneak closer to the human army in their own time. Sakar had suggested dropping them right in the middle of the human army, unleashing their newfound powers to wreak havoc, freeing the others to complete their task. He had barely spoken when the Queen cautioned them that the power she'd shared had limits. Everything they used before reaching the humans' capital would be that much less they'd have to breach the enemy's defenses. When Karash had hesitantly asked why the Queen didn't simply give them more, the great dragon's laughter had shook the cavern and sent the ogres to their knees. She assured them that none of their feeble mortal bodies could contain more power than she'd granted them. None had dared speak again, and soon after they'd set out on their mission. After 2 days of flying over the endless white terrain, they reached the vicinity of the border, landing about half a day's run from the human kingdom. Wanray shared a nod with Karash before his team vanished into the snow. With the first team delivered, Karash led the others back into the sky. They would swing well wide of the human cities and forts. Should they be spotted, it would make their task much more difficult. They would still succeed, no doubt about that. But Karash saw no reason to make the job harder than necessary. For 3 more hours they flew along the border. The sun hung low in the sky and Karash scanned the ground for a likely spot to make camp before they crossed into the human kingdom in the morning. "Karash!" Catan shouted. "A human!" "Kolto, take my burden." When Kolto had assumed control of his spear, Karash flew up and joined Catan. "Where?" Catan pointed, and Karash squinted at a dot flying away from them. "We were seen?" "Yes, I'm sure of it," Catan said. "The human looked right at us and then fled." Karash bared his fangs. "Sakar, Kolto, find a spot to stop for the night. We will join you shortly." Not waiting to find out if the others obeyed his orders, Karash willed himself after the human as fast as his new powers could carry him. Catan fell in beside him, her fangs gleaming in the dusk light. The bloodlust was on her now. Females were always the most beautiful just before a kill. The tiny dot soon resolved itself into a figure which quickly grew big enough to recognize as a human female surrounded by a golden aura. The woman looked back at them, the palpable fear on her face setting his heart racing. A fearful enemy made the sweetest kill. "She's headed for that tower," Catan said. Karash shifted his gaze, only now noticing the stone border tower jutting up out of the snow. He ground his teeth. It would take time to dig the human out of that fortification. Karash didn't want to delay any longer than he had to. Drawing on the knowledge the Queen had imparted, Karash gathered power in his hand and hurled an icy sphere at the woman. The human dodged easily and sent a golden lance streaking back at them. The attack slammed to his berry and disintegrated into golden sparks. He barely even registered the hit. This human was weak, barely worth the time it would take to kill her. A door opened at the base of the tower and the human plunged toward it. Karash and Catan both sent blasts at the shadowy figure just inside the opening, only to see their attacks shatter on a golden barrier. Their prey slipped through the entrance and out of sight. The door slammed shut a moment before Karash landed. He stomped over and slammed his fist into the wood. The door rattled in its frame, but showed no signs of weakening. Karash snarled as Catan landed beside him. A golden light streaked out of the narrow slit above them. He braced for an impact, but the light just vanished. Pathetic. "We need to drag them out of there," Catan said, stating the obvious. Karash nodded and slipped his mask into place, prompting Catan to follow suit. Together, Karash put his hand on the door and Catan joined him. A pale glow emerged from their hands and soon a glaze of ice covered the door. They continued to pour precious energy into the barrier. When the frost fully covered it, Karash drew back and punched the door again. Frozen wood shattered into splinters. He ducked under the frame and stepped into the tower. He looked back at Catan. "Stay here. Make sure they don't fly away." She snarled behind her mask, but Karash just stared her down until she looked away. He nodded once and continued deeper into the tower. There really wasn't much inside, just a small room with a spiral staircase leading to the next floor. A brief look made it clear he'd never fit his bulk up the stairs. He summoned more power and leapt, smashing through the floor and landing on the broken surface above. A pair of golden blasts struck him the moment he settled down. His blue aura deflected both attacks, but Karash felt his energy dim. He couldn't afford to waste time playing with these weaklings. Calling on his berserker powers, Karash sped up, closing the distance between himself and the female he'd been chasing. She didn't even have time to react before his fist crushed her skull. He spun. A trembling, weak-kneed male stared at him. A feeble golden light surrounded the human, but he made no effort to attack. Karash had seen this before, when his prey knew they'd lost the fight and death was inevitable. "What are you?" the human asked. "I am the Queen's chosen." Karash crossed the small room and twisted the human's head off. He relaxed and removed his mask. The threat was eliminated. Now he needed to return to the others before Sakar did anything stupid. Lan Shan adjusted his crossed legs and tried to focus on meditating like his grandfather had taught him. He shivered despite the heat generated by his soul force aura. Communications duty stunk, no question about that. When he arrived at the Northern Army base, the duty officer had assigned him to a tent so old he suspected it arrived with the ship from the old empire. Lon increased the power to his soul force aura just enough to make out the recently repaired rent in the canvas. So many patches covered the walls it looked like they'd made the tent out of quilts. For the past month, he'd spent half of every day sitting in this canvas prison waiting for a message. He didn't question the importance of the job, but that didn't make it any less boring. To make matters worse, he couldn't leave during his shift because all the border monitors had this one spot memorized and they sent all their theoretical messages here. Being sent to serve with the Northern Army hadn't been his first choice when he graduated from the tower last month, but the general needed a third sorcerer to coordinate communications between the 24 scout towers that lined the kingdom's northern border. At least the assignment only lasted 6 months, then he'd rotate out and some other poor bastard could fill this post. Lon hopped to his feet. No way could he focus on meditating now. His mind raced in the quiet darkness, depriving him of the necessary focus. At the tower there had always been something new to do or learn. But out here in the middle of nowhere he'd found only cold and 20,000 soldiers that didn't like sorcerers. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't that they didn't like him so much as that sorcerers made them uncomfortable. They treated him like a single harsh word would cause them to blast them where they stood. Grandfather would say he should embrace the quiet lest the universe grow offended and send some excitement his way. Sometimes it seemed Grandfather had 1,000 sayings and that he wanted to be sure Lon heard them all every chance he had. He paused in his ruminations and cocked his head. A burst of soul force was quickly approaching. It didn't have power enough for attack, so it had to be a message. Now that one had finally arrived, he trembled. Only enemy movement on the border would prompt a lookout to make contact. A golden sphere flew into the tent and vanished, leaving behind a glowing message that simply read, "Help, ogres attacking," along with the number 8. This was it, the enemy had invaded. He had to alert the general. Lon scrambled through the tent flap, wincing in the late afternoon light. He'd barely taken a step when he caught himself. If another message arrived and no one was there to see it, they might lose a vital clue. He ground his teeth. Aliyah wouldn't be thrilled, but he needed her to fill in for him, at least until he spoke to the general. Lon conjured a message orb, formed a short missive, and pictured the tent he shared with the pinch-faced lady sorcerer. The orb zipped away and Lon headed for the command tent. They only lived 100 yards from the communication tent, so it wouldn't take Ali long to arrive. That's how he justified himself as he ran between tents, ignoring the stares of the soldiers as he worked his way deeper into the camp. Finally, the sprawling command tent appeared. 2 pages stood outside beside the flap, and a blue and white flag flapped overhead. "Can we help you, sir?" the page on the right asked. "I need to speak to the general," Lon said. "A message just came in from one of the border towers." A widening of the boy's eyes was the only sign he gave that he understood the seriousness of the situation. The pages both took hold of the tent flap and held it open for him. Lon nodded and ducked inside. In the main chamber, General Cordray stood over the giant map of the Northlands that covered the surface of a great table. Cordray was a warlord of considerable skill and plenty intimidating at over 6 feet tall and sporting a bushy black beard. The general looked up from the map and Lon bowed. "Aren't you supposed to be on communications duty?" "Yes, sir. A message just came in. Watchtower 8 has been attacked by ogres." General Cordray looked back at the map. "That's nearly 1,000 miles from here. What the hell could she be up to out there? What else?" "Sir? What else was in the message?" Lon shook his head. "Nothing, sir. My guess is the sorcerer on duty didn't have time to craft a longer note. Is the war about to start again, sir?" "Don't get ahead of yourself." General Cordray's calm helped ease his racing heart. There's no way for a large force to enter the kingdom from there. The mountains are too high and the nearest pass is 500 miles west of that tower. It must be a small group of raiders, but we won't know for sure until you return with a detailed report. "Me, sir?" Lon wasn't afraid of a fight, but any force strong enough to break into the tower and kill the sorcerer on duty might be more than he could handle on his own. The general must have noticed his hesitance. "Don't worry. I don't need you to fight, just scout out the area and see what we're dealing with. If you find a large group, hurry back and we'll send out an expeditionary force to hunt them down." Phew. A quick recon flight would be simple enough. It wasn't like ogres could attack him from 1,000 feet in the air. "I'll leave at first light, sir." Thanks for listening to episode 4 of The Lightning. I hope you'll join me next week for episode 5. You can check out the complete Soul Force saga on my website, jamesewisher.com. Link in the description. Until next time, goodbye.